Welcome to Happy Crappy Paints Gloomhaven, part 3 of the locked character series. If you haven't unlocked this character, please skip this video. This is what the character Sawbones will look like when we're done. I thought I was going to try something new when painting this mini, using mostly washes, contrast paints. The only real base color I'm using is Celestra Grey. The other colors are colors I use for the metal pieces, and also blood. I will be using Tamyia X27 for that. As you know by now, I like to prime my minis in white, which works very well and actually a requirement if you want to use washes and contrasts, as we're doing for this mini. We're beginning with a cape and we're using Apothecary White for that. When applying washes, apply them richly, taking care not to apply the wash or on any areas that you don't want to color. If you do, you have to wait a little bit for it to dry, longer than a normal base color, maybe up to 10 minutes sometimes if you have a very rich layer. You can use a blow dryer for that if you make many mistakes, and then paint over the area white and then reapply the wash. In this instance, the Apothecary White does not have a lot of pigment in it. It's mostly Celestra Grey, so it doesn't really matter in this instance. The second contrast is for the Skintone, Kinnaman flesh, using it on the face, hands and arms. It is a little hard on the artwork for Sawbones to see whether it actually is a skin color on the arms or not. I decided that it was, but it could have been like a fur coat or something similar instead. I'm making quite a few mistakes when I'm painting this mini. Using Kinnaman flesh is actually one of them. You'll see a little later on in the video that I'm going back to apply Kitty and Skintone and Fleshshade and things to make it look good again. So I'll be making more mistakes. I'll let you know when I do them. Basilicanum Grey is for the fur coat that he's carrying over his arm. This is, I think, where I find contrast paints to work best for these types of areas and minis where there are lots of contrast that required between the edges or the tops of the details and the recessions of the mini, in this case the fur. This is something that actually quite successfully is painted with a wash or just a diluted normal base color or layer, but contrasts works well here as well. Next up is all the leather, and for that we're using Snakebite Leather. This I find is to be the most valuable of the contrasts paints so far. It's very easy to paint leather to look decent using this contrast. Leather is otherwise notoriously difficult to make look natural. Here you will paint over the bottles. We're going to go back later on and use white scar to bring out the white, so we can apply a different wash to create the green glass tint. Here you can see an example of where this contrast paint really shines, where it creates this great contrast between the quiver and the cape with just a few simple strokes that's not very difficult to do. Using the conventional method of painting would have required layering both the cape and the quiver, and then going back using a wash like Nuln Oil for the cape or something similar, or Agrax Earthshade for the quiver. Here I'm correcting some of the mistakes. I missed a few spots with Kinnaman flesh. White scar is your friend if you're using contrast paints. Here I'm using it to cover an area that I will soon, after this have dried, paint over with the contrast paint I've chosen for the pants, the Space Wolves Grey. Here I decided to be a little more cautious on the amount of the contrast paint I want to use, to make sure that the lighter areas actually remain quite light. Beginning with the metal pieces of the Mini, using a Leadbelcher for the shoulder pads and also his saw. I used the shade Carroburg Crimson for the sleeves of the shirt. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of this footage, or I screwed up in the filming. But this is the end result of the sleeves. The art shows quite a matte red, so I thought this worked out well. I also managed to not capture accurately how painted the boots and the lower parts of the pants. So I used Snakebite Leather and Apothecary White for the lower parts of the pants, and that's how the end result looked. Decided to use the base color Celestra Grey for the hair. Celestra Grey has the same tone as Apothecary White, so I used Celestra Grey to touch up some parts of the cape as well. Seraphim Sepia is a great shade to use for light wood colors, so I decided to use that for the tools or knives or wooden splinters or whatever it is that sticks out of his quiver on the back. Getting ready to paint the gold metal pieces, so using Averland Sunset as the base color for all of the areas there. We're going to paint over with the gold metallic in just a little bit. While the Averland Sunset is drying, I used Nuln Oil to shade all the metal pieces and also Sawbone's grey hair. In preparation for painting the bottles, I also used Nuln Oil to create some contrast and some definition around the details of the bottles that are in his belt. If you've accidentally covered this area previously with Apothecary White or some of the other shades, paint them back to white with white scar before doing this. it's easier to see what's what if it's Nuln Oil on white. Nuln Oil also works well to bring in some shade on the parts that should be a little bit darker, underneath his arm or underneath the leather strap that goes across his chest. Using Auric Armour Gold for all the gold pieces, so I'm using that over all of the areas that we previously used Averland Sunset on. Using white scar to paint the white trim of the cape. Here I thought that I saw pieces of the trim or the border on the cape up by the shoulder, and also with this bag. Don't paint this. It doesn't look good. Doesn't come through. Looks like some weird piece of lighting. I ended up painting it over again with Celestra Grey. The only reason why I kept this footage was because it is white. You'll see that it is white, and I'm painting it over, so I kept it in. Just it's a cautionary tale. Don't paint that. Instead, move over to using white scar to paint all the bottles white. And this white we will use a green shade or a glaze to create the glass effect. It's Waywatcher's Green. It's the one I chose. It looks a little more poisonous and deadly and maybe artificial than potentially one of the other green shades that are available that you can use if you want the colors of the bottle to be more subdued. But I find this this sharp green to look interesting and, you know, more visible than a more natural green glass color. Using Runefang Steel for the edges of the metal on the sword. Something I realize now when I'm editing the video is that I should have used Runefang Steel to do some edge highlight on the shoulder pads or as well. I didn't do that, so something that I might go back and do. So while you have Runefang Steel out and on the brush, make sure that you also trace the edges of the shoulder pads. I decided to paint the corks of the bottles. This is barely visible, so it's very much an optional thing to do. But I decided to use XV88 for this. You can use any other light brown that you have for this, or just ignore it. It's very optional. Here you can also see that I've cheated. I've actually painted the eyes with white scar, and I naturally didn't shoot it. Instead, I have footage of the irises using Abaddon Black, and as usual this is difficult and should really be done prior to shading the face with Skintone. So of course I'm ending up with a cross-eyed doctor. But that's easily fixed with shades of, or using the Skintone shade a little bit later. So while that is drying, I'm using Abaddon Black for the base. So Reikland Fleshshade to correct the eyes in the face, which I also used Reikland Fleshshade to add some more color and definition to the skin tone on the hands and the eyes. I thought Kinnaman Flash was a little too light. It also made it obvious that I had to go back and fix it all with Cadian Flash and Kislev Flash. But we're not really there yet. First, while the wash or the shade is drying, I'm using Celestra Grey as a dry brush to create some of the definition on the tops of the hair to bring it back up a little again, since we used Nuln Oil to shade it all. I'm using Celestra Grey to make the tops of the hair lighter again. You can even go white here if you like at the very top. And now we're ready to fix the skin tone. As usual, when we paint skin tone, we use Cadian Flash to the top parts of the skin that's subject to sunlight from above, or an imagined sun from above, and then Kislev Flash on a smaller area to make it lighter. You can even mix some Kislev with white if you'd like to go back on with a third or even a fourth layer if you want to continue bringing or highlighting the skin. I think that might be valuable on the nose, lips and cheeks, because that's the face that you normally look at. Moving over to the blood and the blood effects. Before you do this, make sure you varnish your mini, because otherwise the blood effect will look matte. I'm using a matte varnish, and that will take away the glossy look of the blood. So mixing blood with the, by now probably familiar trick of the X27 red Tamyia paint with Agrax Earthshade at a potential 50-50 mix, and then start dabbling on blood. I didn't really do a good job here. I'm not happy with the end result. It looks a little bit too blotchy. I used, I think, a too thick of a brush for this, so not super happy. So take my advice and use a smaller brush, or even try to sprinkle on some of the paint. Be wary though, so this is a paint that will not wash away with water, so make sure you don't spray this paint all over your work area where you don't want it to be. That was that. We are done with Sawbones. I really enjoyed painting this miniature, even though I'm not super happy with the end result. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye.